Well, we had general conference today, and when you go to conference, when you go to a session, you think, what can I take home from this? Let's find some highlights that I can apply to my life. In about the time of one general conference session, your entire outlook is going to change. You're going to know more than you've learned in all of them combined in your life, guaranteed.
Welcome to an MTVL presentation. Mormon Truth Video Library is about bringing accurate LDS history to light and comparing primary source documents wherever possible to the correlated materials found on LDS.org. You know where the like button is, and down the bottom of the description you can subscribe, get the latest, and just left of that, jump right into the channel and explore the library. Hope you enjoy it. This video, if you're LDS or even if you're not, this affects everyone in the United States, if not the world. And your world's about to be turned upside down. You'll never view things as the same. I'll have to build up a little bit and give some background information. Some of it's a little personal story. But I'm going to show physical evidence, undeniable, that the world is so much different than you believe it is.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is founded on the premise that God has restored the fullness of the gospel in the latter days, that families can be together forever. But what about the Book of Mormon? What about secret combinations, lusting for power, gain, and glory? The conspiracy to destroy the freedom of all lands, nations, and people in the latter days, as told in Ether chapter 8. What about that? Have we forgotten the prophecies concerning America, secret societies, and the prophecies of the destruction of the American Republic, that its constitution would hang by a thread but be rescued by the boys from the mountains, the elders of Israel, from this wicked combination which would have great power in the latter days, prophesied by them of old, as we are told, and translated by Joseph Smith Jr.? What about these secret alliances, these secret combinations? We don't hear much about it these days. We used to when Ezra Taft Benson was around. What has happened? Well, there are a lot of prophecies about the church's future. Let's get into it.
So, the Articles of Faith of the church state that we believe that Zion will be established here in America. And the saints were waiting for that, were anticipating it. In fact, they were beginning to build up Zion, they thought, in Jackson County, Missouri, and were driven out. And so people have been waiting for the prophet to say, it's time to go back to Jackson County, Missouri. They've been waiting for a long time, like 100 and how many years now? Okay? 180 years or something? That's a long time. Is this turning into church folklore? I mean, that's part of the Articles of Faith. And there are people that live, conference to conference, waiting for the prophet to say, it's time to go. They think, are they even going to have time to sell their homes? They've got food storage. I mean, the LDS theology in the prophecies regarding building Zion in Jackson County, Missouri, preparatory to the return of Jesus Christ, and somewhere in between there, the 10 lost tribes coming down from the land of the north, melting the ice. I mean, it's some heavy-duty stuff that people are expecting, and it's been a long wait. What's going on? So, I'm going to blow the lid off of some things here with regards to America and the projected and past history of America from the LDS viewpoint, traditional viewpoint. And this all is part of my deconstructing reality to find out that things are what they aren't. Everything is what it isn't. Is that an Alice in Wonderland quote? Graham Hancock said everything is something else, and I'm not going to say it because there are ears that won't want to hear it. Anyway, so I'm going to present some heavy-duty evidence here that even people that have studied the secret combinations, secret society network and so forth in America and the world, after reading about hints of, things about that in the Book of Mormon, especially in Ether chapter 8, I'm going to discuss or share some things. Actually, much of it's a presentation from someone else, and I've taken some highlights out of it, which is information that probably less than 1% of the non-elite population have. So this is going to be pretty amazing and it's going to be worthwhile. And I'm going to mix in a little history here, so a little bit of my story, maybe just a little bit of perspective. So, if you have the traditional, Mormon view, that's one thing. You'll probably relate a little bit more. If you are one of the newer, more liberal people that are kind of blowing off a lot of the traditional conservatism of the constitutional republic and manifest destiny type of take on things, stay with me anyway. This is amazing stuff. So there's going to be a lot of factual information presented, physical evidence. This isn't like theory, okay? This is not conspiracy theory, and not all conspiracies are theories. Actually, probably most of them are not. Proofs of Conspiracy was a really good book I read a long time ago. It was written probably a couple hundred years ago on certain secret societies and so forth. So here we go. A little bit of my background. Did not grow up in the church. Excuse me. So started off, had my little golden Bible and had evolution books and tried to get to church and ask, other people, what about God? And by the time sometime when I was between 8 and 9, evolution started to win. Didn't get to enough churches, or went to some and wasn't impressed. I did watch Motab on Sundays in the morning, and I liked that. Starting when I was about 6 or 7. We had no affiliation with the church, though. So I wound up having a spiritual experience when I was a young teenager, and about that time we had also started studying things having to do with the Constitutional Republic of America being under siege from basically forces that were subversive to the Bill of Rights, communist stuff, or that sort of thing. So I started reading books which presented factual evidence showing international banking concerns financing the Bolshevik Revolution, as well as multiple other wars, and basically dominating the American media and banking and drawing America into World War I, World War II, etc., etc. So I started learning about that sort of thing, and it was about that time that we wound up having some missionaries come over. They give us the Joseph Smith lesson, and I had actually a spiritual experience. I don't have these burning in the bosom things. I had stuff from the spiritual world actually going on. And, I don't know, maybe say some people say about 5% of the population are exposed to the spiritual world, and a lot of people just aren't. Next lesson was on plan of salvation, and since I had been studying the New Testament for a while because of the spiritual experience I had a lot of questions still, and Christianity didn't make sense because basically, 99% of the people are going to burn in hell because they don't get a chance to hear the gospel, get baptized, or accept Jesus or whatever, Christianity, whatever version you got on that, God's burning his children. It doesn't work out too well. So the plan of salvation lesson was really something that made some sense to me, that the Swedenborgian type of doctrines that are taught there, that are that the church is well known for, that are not in the Book of Mormon, but they're in the section 76 and 132 and that sort of thing. So the eternal family and pre-existence and all that. So I coupled this with learning a lot about America and its history, and in more recent times, watching a conspiratorial effort to undermine the freedom of the people to work towards the predictions of what's in the Book of Revelations, basically of a satanic one world government, the kingdom of Antichrist. And at any rate, so so people trying to conserve freedom and fight against that sort of a thing, from various different, mostly religious people, were involved, versus the typical, Students for Democratic Society, the Bernie Sanders kind of starting, your riots at Ohio State kind of crowd on the other side. So we learned a lot of things, and I learned about, group persuasion, coercive persuasion, sometimes called, groupthink or other names, and, the tactics used by the media and in the so-called educational system to manipulate people. And I read a lot of books, a lot of books about constitutional republic stuff, and I also started reading stuff, the prophecies in the church, and many people probably, notice those things, like Ether Chapter 8, about the, secret combination that would be working to destroy the freedom of the Gentiles here and of all nations, subjugate everyone under a tyrannical world government of Satanism, basically. It's in the Book of Mormon, it's basically in the Book of Revelations. And there's a lot of specific prophecy from mostly Joseph Smith, and it's not necessarily canonized. So I read a whole lot of books, and the more I studied, I started waking up to see that not everything was really the manifest destiny story that we get, like in First Nephi and so forth. God protected the colonists and made them win the war against the British, so that this could be the bastion of freedom, have the gospel restored, that kind of a thing. Started seeing some inconsistencies in the story with America's foundation. At first you just look at, things are just getting corrupted in the early 20th century by these international bankers, but actually, as you deconstruct, notice that there are things that are out of place and not right. You go, well, wait a minute, that war was engineered. No, wait a minute, that one was engineered. Hey, wait a minute, the Revolutionary War doesn't look right. Read the Treaty at Versailles, and you notice it doesn't look like the colonists really won. Not with the terms they agreed to, the financial, extreme burdens this country got into. Anyway, we're going to look at a presentation that is completely almost independent of anything that I ever read about, heard about, with regards to how things are done, how these secretive and secret societies within secretive societies operate and make things actually work here and have governance. Going to find out that what we thought was our constitutional republic is basically an illusion. A lot of the things that we've been told are just simply not the case. We live in an illusion. So, pretty much with that, I'm going to start to open up the floodgates of information here on how things are actually financially controlled in the physical, legal, financial world here in the United States in particular, and how things are done through financial and legal vehicles such as the corporations. Everything is a corporation, and everything is commerce, and nothing is what we think it is. So, with that, I'm going to start utilizing highlights from a presentation that gets really involved with that aspect. In the meantime, also going to mix in evidence of secret alliances in high places with people in power in various areas of society, whether it's Hollywood, the media, politics, finance, banking, and very important, religion. Because when the powers that be want to go to war, the Amalekites on the towers are the preachers. They are the religious leaders. And we will see that their
role is critical in directing public opinion, especially when it comes to patriotism and getting people to want to serve, as it is called, in the military operations, which happen to be worldwide for the United States. So, when I was a young person, a teenager, I began studying these things, and I noticed that certain secret societies seemed to be highly influential in guiding other organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, NGOs like the CFR, into determining foreign policy and causing these things to happen, causing these wars to happen, and seem to have a great effect on what was done in government, whether it be in the Democrat or the Republican parties, starting early in the 20th century, is the story, the way things were being told from what I was seeing. So basically, I was learning that the constitutional republic, which was set up by the founding fathers, was definitely under siege by these forces, and moving towards a socialist totalitarian state in increments, and that wars were being engineered by certain means to bring the United States and the world into a condition that was much less free than we would want it to be. About this time, I was introduced to the church. I was introduced to the church shortly after I began reading the New Testament, due to a spiritual experience that I had, which I'm not going to relate at this time. And as a child, I had a Bible with pictures and stories in it, and I also had books on evolution as a small child, and had concluded, I suppose, that the stories looked pretty convincing in terms of evolution with the pictures and so forth, and hadn't been reading the scriptures for a few years. But due to the spiritual experience that I had, which also involved the New Testament, I had begun studying the scriptures. But due to our association with people, with friends, I was introduced, or our family was introduced to some lifetime missionaries from the church. And when these guys came over to our home, my first experience with them, at least, we got the Joseph Smith story with the pictures, flip chart pictures and so forth. And I had an experience that evening that was very impressive. It involved the spiritual world. And then the next lesson we had was the plan of salvation lesson. And to me, that lesson began to really answer many of the questions that I had in my mind at the time. I had asked serious questions with regard to the purpose of life and whether or not there was life after death since the time I was about 5 years old. I had serious concerns with this, and very long, and I wasn't finding what I was hoping for. And so I was looking for the path to eternal life. I had questioned other young people with regards to religion since the time I was about 6 years old. So, at any rate, questions were being answered, because Christianity really didn't make much sense, with God sending most of his children to hell who never had a chance to hear the gospel or to be baptized, to, depending on which church it was, whether you need to be baptized or have a special prayer to Jesus or whatever it is. You know, if you miss it, you're going to burn in hell, and that didn't really seem to make a lot of sense. And then if you make it to heaven, what are you going to do? Sit on a cloud and play a harp? So I called it the harps or barbecue idea of life. And you either barbecued in hell or you're playing a harp, and it really didn't make a lot of sense. So the LDS plan of salvation really seemed to make a lot more sense. God was providing a way through the baptism for the dead and so forth, and the premortal existence just made a lot of sense to me. And like I said, I had spiritual experiences with reading the New Testament, and also with the missionaries coming over. And I'm not talking about this burning in the bosom stuff that you read about in D&C 9 or something. I'll probably keep those to myself at this point. But we became involved in the church, and I studied, and things made sense to me more than anything ever had, with regards to purpose in life and the eternal destiny, eternal progression, that sort of a thing, the LDS plan of salvation. And so we're continuing to study what was going on with the government of the United States, and what seemed to be a
projection towards
what's basically predicted in the Book of Revelations, which would be a totalitarian world, satanic regime, the kingdom of Antichrist. And so we were involved with people who were in the church and people who were in other Christian faiths, and maybe some atheists, but I'm not sure if there were many of those, in this effort of education and trying to stem the tide of the destruction of the Bill of Rights and Constitution. And we studied, after our family, when I read the Book of Mormon. And of course we know in the Book of Mormon there's a lot of talk about secret combinations. And of course in the Book of Ether, in chapter 8, we read about a certain secret combination, or in other words, secret society, oath-bound secret society, that would be seeking to destroy the freedom of the Gentiles here in the United States, basically, and the rest of the world, progressively there, would be what it appeared to say, working in covert fashion to destroy the freedom that the Book of Mormon also seemed to be advocating, that was set up by God. As we read early in the Book of Mormon, in First Nephi, the suggestion that the Spirit of God, or the Holy Ghost, overshadowed Columbus to come discover the Americas and to bring the people of Europe here to set up a nation that would have freedom of religion, and in general a lot more freedom than would have been had under the European monarchies and in the feudalistic type of system that they tended to have there as well, with regards to property rights and so forth. We all know the story, or many of us do. So the idea was that God set up a nation where religious freedom would be able to cultivate an environment where the gospel could be restored for the last times, the dispensation of the fullness of times. And of course, as the story goes, shortly after the nation was established with this constitutional government, Joseph Smith was born, and had heavenly messengers, including God the Father and Jesus Christ, as the story went, come to see him and begin to usher in the dispensation of the fullness of times, in which the priesthood authority would be restored, revelation, we'd know all the things that we needed to know, and so forth. And as we studied these things, the view of the LDS Church has a special role in the projected history of the United States in prophecy. So we learn that the Constitution would hang by a thread, but that the LDS Church, the elders of the church, would be found basically holding up the constitutional principles, and that by divine intervention, accompanying great faith exercised by faithful members of the church, the Lord would preserve the nation from utter destruction and utter domination by totalitarian forces, which the Book of Mormon essentially prophesied or predicted would gain significant amounts of control over the United States and the world, and only through God's intervention and the faithfulness of the saints would this bastion of freedom narrowly be preserved and help usher in the millennium by preparing the people to meet the Christ and establishing Zion in Jackson County, Missouri, and having the lost 10 tribes come down from the land of the north and join the people in Zion. So this history in advance business that was projected through various prophecies of Joseph Smith, many that are not necessarily canonized, in addition to the Book of Mormon, had an effect on many people in the church, I'm sure. And so our view was that God set up America, as I have just stated, as a bastion of freedom. And in the Doctrine and Covenants, is it section 100, 101, or it's 100 or 101, maybe it's verse 29. It says that the Constitution was established. God raised up wise men to establish the Constitution of the United States. It's where Joseph Smith's, thinking about redressing the, wrongs done to the saints in Missouri, I believe. I think it's section 100. So when we wake up, it's because we notice that things are wrong. So we noticed that things were wrong. We had these wars with, World War I, World War II, things that just weren't right, Lusitania being sunk, the attack on Pearl Harbor allowed to occur when there were so many warning signs, and, all the manipulations bringing the United States into these things, and the things that have happened. So I'm not going to get too deep into that sort of thing, but we learned how the media was basically controlled by certain people with strong financial interests, and a certain group called the Council on Foreign Relations, which I think now has about 4,000 members, was set up and was a very integral part of this secret combination, you might say, that was engineering the shift to a totalitarian government and preparation for a merger with other countries into a world government under the United Nations. So we learned a lot of factual information, and we learned how the media was manipulated and tactics that they used, certain labeling and creating loaded terms and using them so that they could say, oh, conspiracy theory or those sort of things that cast doubt on people, McCarthyism, when the Reese Committee or the Committee on the Investigating Un-American Activities and so forth found all sorts of communist cells operating in the United States. The media was employed to denigrate, people that were seeking to protect the Constitution from subversive groups. They were denigrated in the media a lot. So anyway, I learned more about secretive societies and secret societies within secretive societies. One book I read was called Proofs of Conspiracy. It was written, a long, long time ago. Was it Robinson? Yeah. Anyway, and it dealt with certain secret societies and so forth. And it seems that Freemasonry was very much involved with what was going on in this respect, and seemed to be a meeting ground for more secret, for absolutely secret societies within Freemasonry, and it was like the carrier for other societies, secret combinations. Anyway, I noticed that things weren't always quite lining up with what I was told. First, they weren't lining up with what you're told in textbooks because of the influence over the media and the educational system. And then I learned about behavioral control, coercive persuasion, group mind control tactics used by the media and other things, sensitivity trading, neurolinguistic programming, hypnotic language, a lot of different things that I learned about studying, psychological techniques that are used for various means. Some just for people trying to be successful in life without necessarily trying to manipulate others for anything wrong, but just learning communication skills. But in conjunction with all these things, I learned a lot. And then I started seeing things that seemed out of place. And because of my walk in life, I ran into Freemasonry. I was never a member. I was never a Mason. But I ran into it, shall we say. And the more I had studied on this sort of thing, the more I learned of things that were inherently wicked at the top levels. And I read things. I read, things from Manly P. Hall and Albert Pike, so forth. And when you see things out of place, you say, well, what's that going on here? And let's look at some different pictures. Here we got the obelisk, and I showed this stuff in another video. But, you look at things and you go, wait a minute. Okay, why am I seeing pentagrams with witchcraft? But then you see it on the temples, And we hear there's always an excuse. Oh, well, that was Anton LaVey. He popularized that. It was always a good symbol before, but these things are ancient. It's like the hexagram, the six-sided one. It's for, you learn about, here's the magical stuff. And there were things that weren't right. The Jupiter talisman that belonged to Joseph Smith, the 13 spires on every bigger spire. Anyway, there were things, and then you look and you see all these leaders of religion. They're all occultists, Why? Okay, like I said, there's a Jupiter talisman, a magical talisman that Joseph Smith carried with him and had when he died. And there's Ellen Gould White from SDA, and she was involved with the occultists, like Theosophy, like Blavatsky and all those people that you'd learn about with the Lucifer Trust, and Charles Taze Russell, starting the Jehovah's Witnesses, and then everybody likes to talk about Joseph Smith, in Freemasonry, and I think a lot of the things that they say about him are a little bit overblown as far as, I'm not convinced he was a third degree Freemason. He was in the York Rite, not the Scottish Rite. It was they talk about the sublime degree. Well, that's also associated with just a Master Mason, I think, in the York Rite. So I try to really document things to be factual. But here he's got the obelisk. They got that. The Russell's got the pyramid. White's got the obelisk. All these people. Billy Graham, Oral Roberts. All these people. There's Charles Taze Russell. It's Jehovah's Witnesses. Heavy duty occultist, high degree Freemason also, and we just see these occult things. Here we go. There's Robert Schuller on the right. There's Mikhail Gorbachev, and look at look what they're doing there. All these guys. There's the Queen. Check it out. And you say, what we got the Eye of Horus? Why we got all these occult things going on here? What are these guys doing? Look at what they're doing in front of too here. Okay, so. You see these top-level leaders in politics and religion, and they're all, doing things that don't look right. Okay, yeah, so this is, what's that, Scowcroft? There's Bush, Dan Quayle, throwing the horns, just like Bush, and just like Cheney, and then now here's Cheney and Gordon Hinckley, and check out the handshake. What's going on here? These are these things that you look and you go, wait, what the heck? Now, wait a minute. Here's Monson and Bush, and wait a minute, check this out. What's going on here? Well, what's Obama doing? Well, these guys are involved with the secret combinations. The Book of Mormon tells us that that's going to be the case. If you believe the Book of Mormon for any reason, you may not. You may be somebody who believes that Joseph Smith's a prophet. You may not be. There's Bill Clinton, but he threw a lot of Masonic stuff in the Book of Mormon, and that's like a dozen years before he actually joined Freemasonry. But he was involved with the occult, very much so. There's the seer stone that supposedly he saw the English words for the Egyptian on that in his hat. That's what his wife said. That's what Emma said. That's what her dad said. That's what David Whitmer said. That's what Martin Harris said. Oliver Cowdery just said he used the Urim and Thummim in the hat, which they called this sometimes the Urim and Thummim. They called the magic spectacles, which supposedly Moroni took back after the 116-page thing. And we see these pictures like Joseph Smith's trying to figure out what the plates mean by looking at them. But everybody that worked with him, his wife and everybody, said that's not what happened. Here's the first vision, except for that's the one that nobody ever knew about. His family never knew about. The father and son thing, that's not historically. There's the Moroni with him all alone in his room, which is not what he shared his room with like 4 brothers and they only had 2 beds. A lot of times we have pictures that try to present evidence to our mind, and it's not necessarily something that was true, but it goes right into our head, subconscious. There's the one angel appearing to him, the first vision story that he told, and that William told, this family knew about. Sometimes it was an angel, sometimes they said it was the Lord, sometimes they said it was in the woods or in his room, but there wasn't any, and it was never in 1820, and it was never with, the father and the son, not until he published that in 1842, 2 years before he died. Hinckley and Cheney. And that's at BYU. He's given them a diploma, honorary diploma. That's after they got rid of Stephen Jones, who was blowing the lid off of, the government story on 9/11. So anyway, I probably rambled way too much here. I want to get into the financial proof of what something is going on in the United States that is completely different from what you believe you have in terms of representative government. We're talking about a completely different invisible government set up by means of the corporation. We're going to find out we've got a completely different... These guys all work together. Okay, so I want to explore some highlights here of a video called The Corporation Nation, which is just mind-blowing in terms of how things are actually operating with regard to finance and the government of the United States, what we believe is the government. So I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning here. It says, the United States is comprised of over 185,000 incorporated state, county, city, town, municipalities, districts, councils, school districts, pension funds, enterprise operations, lotteries, etc. And they are actually for-profit corporations, unbeknownst to the public, which have been mistakenly called a representative government. The hidden wealth in this investment, collective investment here of these 185,000 corporations, starting at the top with, the United States Incorporated, and then you've got state governments, and you've got city governments, and you've got, municipalities of different sorts, counties, and some of the entities I've just named. There are 185,000 of them. So about 10% of them, about 18,000, are in California. And they are actually privately owned businesses. We think of them as our government, but we're going to look at the comprehensive annual financial reports from these entities, like from Salt Lake City, and from the state of Florida, from Sacramento, and this video's, it's over 3 hours, and we're just going to take a few minutes to show some highlights, and I'm going to encourage everybody to, I think you're going to want to see this. This is like, if you took a semester in U.S. government history or something, you wouldn't learn any of this, and you'll know more about the way things really operate by this information than you would in any class ever. The collective investments totaling, what does it say, well over $100 trillion. And this was like in 2010. 100 trillion. So at the time this, some of this data was being gathered, this was, the national debt was probably approaching, 8 or 9 trillion. So now it's approaching $20 trillion. And we're going to learn so much about how things really operate, that these are actually for-profit businesses, and we call them government. Everything is commerce. And if you think it sounds wild, of course it sounds wild, but these are documented. I mean, they're incorporated, and they have the comprehensive annual financial reports, which people just don't see or understand if they do see them. And this gentleman's really going to get into detail. You can see, and you can look them up online yourself. Ron Paul was talking about audit the Fed. It's audited every year. He's phony. This information is available. Things are so much different than we perceive. 97% of Utah is federally owned. Okay, so the hidden wealth in this investment, we don't need to have a national debt. We don't need all sorts of issues. He's going to show how all the Fortune 500 companies are basically, the majority of their stock is collectively owned within the networked group of these 185,000 government corporations, which are not owned by the people. They should be, but they're not. And the budget, all we see is, with their normal, what they collect from the people, but not what their investments make from what they saved and invested, and the control that is exercised by these major corporations, because they elect the board of governors, the board of governors, the board of directors, because they own the majority of the stock, so they control everything, and it's just amazing. So it's a complete conflict of interest. It's a complete conflict of interest in everything. Things are not. It's an entirely another world. So I'm going to go ahead and you can see what I've just got to roll in front of you a little bit here. I'm going to play some highlights here. Everything that you think the way the United States operates is wrong.
Let's examine what the former Auditor General of the United States said during this interview. The big lie. The government is not a corporation, I assure you. When I heard this come out of Mr. Walker's mouth, I nearly laughed. Apparently, he thought I wouldn't follow up on this little talk we had. But he was wrong. And the first person to receive this documentary will be Mr. David Walker. After all, he gave me his card and asked for more information. So here it is, Dave. Let's start with my own town, Salt Lake City, in the great state of Utah, very near to where this interview took place. I was sent a letter not too long ago for a parking violation that I never received from the Salt Lake City Law Department. Here, now, is a picture of that letter. Now you'll notice that the first thing you see is that this letter is indeed from the Salt Lake City Corporation. This is the government of the city of Salt Lake, and it doesn't really get any plainer than that. Now, in the first paragraph, it states that I am in default on the debt which I owe to the Salt Lake City Corporation, which they have cleverly nicknamed the City for outstanding parking fines. The city, meaning the corporation or municipality, acting on behalf of the city, demands that I pay the entire amount due, plus what I'm assuming is a late fee no later than 10 days from the date of this letter. And as we read on, after numerous threats of retaliation, the confiscation or theft of my vehicle, and a negative ding on my credit rating, the Salt Lake City Corporation actually has the nerve to tell me to please govern myself accordingly. Then, they tell me that I can't pay this bill in cash, and that I'm supposed to make my check payable to the Salt Lake City Corporation. Now, if you don't comprehend the tyrannical, corporate fascist nature of this threatening letter, perhaps this will help. When I did a search on the internet for information on the Salt Lake City Corporation, this page came up in the results. And there in the description section it states, the Salt Lake City Corporation is a private company, categorized under fire protection, local government, and located in Salt Lake City, Utah. So my city government is a private corporation? Not public, but private? Translation, the former Comptroller General lied through his bald, crooked, smiling face. Further down in the description box, it states that the location type for the Salt Lake City Corporation is a branch. A branch? Trees have branches, all connected to one large trunk. But wait a minute, what other businesses have branches? How about banks? I bank with Wells Fargo at one of their local banking branches. This simply means that this is one of hundreds of sub-corporate hubs which all link to the mother corporation, or the tree trunk, that is Wells Fargo Bank, the main corporation. And in truth, Wells Fargo Bank is probably connected to another mother corporation. Does this mean that the Salt Lake City Police Department is owned by a private company? Considering the reference to the Salt Lake City Corporation's law department? Have our police become nothing more than corporate security, there to protect and serve the corporate interests of the city and state? The real question is, how can a government be a branch of another corporation? Is Salt Lake City just a sub-corporate hub under another larger corporation? Well, needless to say, this really threw me for a loop, and so I decided to look at other governments within the great state of Utah. And I found something very interesting. Here is an official website for the United States District Court for the state of Utah. The problem is, it doesn't refer to Utah as a state. Instead, it recognizes Utah only as a district. Here it states, the United States District Court for the District of Utah. After some research, I found that the two-letter abbreviations that all 50 states have been assigned are simply federal district locator codes. States are still called by their full original names in name only. And you thought your state abbreviation was just for your convenience, so that you didn't have to write it out on letters, perhaps? Are other states in the same predicament? You betcha. Here is the state constitution for the state of Ohio. Now, an interesting note about Ohio, instead of entering and leaving what most states call the city limit, the signs in Ohio state that you are entering or leaving the corporation limit. Here are a few snapshots of these signs. one is especially interesting, a 40-year before and after shot. Notice that the sign has changed, and a new speed limit is now posted for entrance into the corporation known as Gambier. This is common as each corporation has different speed limits. It also ensures that certain percentages of taxpayers will be speeding once they cross the corporate line. And that means speeding tickets. And that, my friends, means corporate revenue. Back to the Ohio State Constitution. When I click on the link, Organization of Cities, etc., I get the following page. The General Assembly shall provide for the organization of cities and incorporated villages by general laws and restrict their power so as to prevent the abuse of such power. Now, the key word here is obviously incorporated. But also, organization is a corporate term, just as businesses are organized and then reorganized in a bankruptcy. And just as the United States as a federal corporation has been reorganized more than one time in its history. In order to qualify this as true and break through the belief system set up by the corporate media, you may pause this video now and read this statement by Republican James Traffickett, which is in congressional record and was stated before he was thrown into jail. In Corporate Bankruptcy Code, Chapter 9 bankruptcies are allowed only for state municipalities. Chapter 9 bankruptcies are a form of corporate reorganization and not liquidation. So just what is a municipality? To get the answer to this, I went to a commonly used website named Wikipedia. Now, I don't usually use Wikipedia as a source, but in this case I made an exception. The information is well sourced and easily verifiable. A municipality, or municipal corporation, is the legal term for a local governing body, including but not necessarily limited to cities, counties, towns, townships, charter townships, villages, and boroughs, like the 5 boroughs which comprise New York City proper. Municipal incorporation occurs when such municipalities become self-governing corporate entities under the laws of the state or province in which they are located. Often, this event is marked by the award or declaration of a municipal charter from the state of incorporation. Let's take one of the largest states as an example. Do you live in California? If so, which corporation do you live in? There are 480 incorporated municipalities in California, of which 458 are called cities and 22 are called towns. Under California law, the terms city and town are explicitly interchangeable. See Government Code sections 34500 through 34504. So, the name of a municipal corporation can either be city of blank or town of blank, regardless of its population. The term township is obsolete. The terms villages and borough have never been used in California. Here's an alphabetical list, and I'll bet that you find your own city or town. Notice that the left-hand column lists the city or municipality, the middle column lists the county where that municipality is housed, which is a totally separate corporate entity with its own local, national, and international investments and enterprise operations that must also file a comprehensive annual financial report every end of business year. And the right-hand column shows the date of incorporation for the city or municipality, some going more than a century back in history. Are you sweating yet, Mr. Walker? Which corporation do you live in? Sacramento, my hometown. So let's use California as our example state. California has one of the largest economies in the world. All of this business is conducted within the over 18,000 different governments within the state, each one a separate incorporated entity. If you have a private business incorporated anywhere within the state of California, it must be incorporated within one of these municipalities and within the state's corporate guidelines. Each corporate city or town that was just listed has within them other municipal corporate structures like school districts, pension funds, utility companies, city councils, and even enterprise operations such as golf courses, movie theaters, malls, etc., etc. As stated earlier, the government owns just about everything you see through collective investment. But you must not think of these as just individual corporations, for as we saw above with the Salt Lake City Corporation, these more than 18,000 corporate governments in California are like bank branches as well. The only way to get a grasp on the power, wealth, prosperity, land, and property ownership of the state of California is to take all of these over 18,000 individual corporate governments, including school districts, counties, the state corporation, municipalities, enterprise operations, cities, towns, pension funds, etc., not forgetting its foreign investments and operations. For instance, CalSTRS is now an offshore multinational corporation, and then add up their collective private investments and count them as branches or sub-corporations of one main corporation, which is California Incorporated. What better way to hide the wealth of the corporate government than to divide it up into thousands and thousands of branches, making it nearly impossible to add up the actual ownership and wealth of the government as a whole? But don't stop there. For then you must consider that collectively between the municipalities and individual corporate governments within all 50 of the United States proper, America houses over 185,000 different corporate governments, municipalities, and entities, which we might as well call branches. Now, the word collective is vital to comprehend here, for as one giant framework of a country, this collective corporate United States government owns almost everything in sight, and this will be shown later in this presentation. The United States has now been almost completely privatized, with land and municipalities often being sold off to foreign investors and foreign private corporations. In fact, under Executive Order 12803, signed by then President of the United States George H.W. Bush in 1992, the Corporation of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., neither a state nor a part of the 50 States United, this federal corporate government was given the authority to privatize most or all of the infrastructure within the United States without congressional consent or vote. This means that the federal government, or the corporation that acts in lieu of a federal government, can and has allowed the selling of any municipalities or city or any government's assets which were built with taxpayer monies, including but not limited to roads, tunnels, bridges, electricity supply facilities, mass transit, rail transportation, airports, ports, waterways, recycling wastewater treatment facilities, solid waste disposal facilities, hospitals, prisons, schools, and housing. Executive Order 12803 lists these as examples of America's saleable and or leasable infrastructure. But this is not to be taken as a complete list, as these are just some examples of what our government has been selling off to foreign investors for almost 20 years. Executive Order 12803 names this authority in its destructive pages as infrastructure privatization, and states that this power allows for the, quote, disposition or transfer of an infrastructure asset, such as by sale or by long-term lease from a state or local government to a private party. Now, wasn't it our good friend David Walker who said that the government isn't interested in selling off these assets that they don't list on the taxpayer budget? Well, what is the government doing with all of these investments? Why does the U.S. Why does the federal government own 95% of Nevada and 97% of
Utah? That's an issue of federal lands, federal minerals.
That's an asset, right?
That's correct. And you are correct in saying that that's not on the balance sheet. They don't value that because they have no intention to sell it. All right? I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just trying to explain it.
Is it the government's land or is it our land?
It's the people's land. Oh,
it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Well, but if the government is a corporation and it's actually 185,000 different corporations, how is something that's owned by a corporation our land?
The government is not a corporation.
Yes, it is. Most certainly. All corporations have to file a comprehensive annual financial report.
Yeah, but the government is not a corporation.
It most certainly is.
I can assure you it's not.
Really? The government is not a corporation. When we look at Executive Order 12803, Infrastructure Privatization, we read in Section 1, Definitions, for purposes of this order, A, privatization means the disposition or transfer of an infrastructure asset, such as by sale or by long-term lease from a state or local government to a private party. In other words, the selling of taxpayer-funded infrastructure to private corporations or individuals. B. Infrastructure asset means any asset financed in whole or in part by the federal government, in other words, taxpayer money, and needed for the functioning of the economy. Examples of such assets include, but are not limited to, roads, tunnels, etc. And D. Transfer price means the amount paid or to be paid by a private party for an infrastructure asset if the asset is transferred as a result of a competitive bidding. This, my friends, is why the carpool lanes on your freeways and highways have turned into toll roads that you must pay to use. A private corporation now leases or owns those lanes, either outright or through public-private partnerships or PPPs, despite being built with your taxpayer monies. This is also why closed-circuit TV cameras are now mounted just about everywhere you look, monitoring your every move at every major intersection that you cross. This is why the parking police in Hollywood are actually part of a private corporation based in New York City that only hires minorities and who takes no oath to the Constitution. This is why the parking meters in downtown Chicago now cost $27 to park for only half an hour. They were sold off and leased to private enterprises. And this is why your gas, electric, sewer, trash, and other utility prices are going through the roof. Privatization means deregulation. Deregulation means no limitations on pricing due to the monopolistic authority granted by the state through these partnerships. This is the privatization of America, referred to above as infrastructure privatization. This is corporate fascism, rule by corporate government proxy. This is the corporatization of the United States. In another article by Jean Dugan, entitled Facing Budget Gaps, Cities Sell Parking, Airports, Zoo, she writes, cities and states across the nation are selling and leasing everything from airports to zoos, a fire sale that could help plug budget holes now, but worsen their financial woes over the long run. California is looking to shed state office buildings. Milwaukee has proposed selling its water supply. In Chicago and New Haven, Connecticut, it's parking meters. In Louisiana and Georgia, airports are up for grabs.
And you are correct in saying that that's not on the balance sheet. They don't value that because they have no intention to sell it. All right? I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just trying to explain it.
Is it the government's land or is it our land?
People's land.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Many governments are using asset sales to balance budgets ravaged by declines in tax revenues and unfunded pensions. In recent congressional testimony, billionaire investor Warren Buffett said he worried about how municipalities will pay for public workers, retirement, and health benefits, and suggested that the federal government may ultimately be compelled to bail out states. Remember, a bailout means a purchase. Some properties are being sold at fire sale prices into a weak market. The deal means cities are giving up long-term, recurring income streams in exchange for lump sum payments to plug one-time budget gaps. The current deals are fundamentally different because control of the asset transfers to private hands. The most popular deals in the works are metered municipal street and garage parking spaces. One of the first was Chicago, where the city received $1.16 billion in 2008 to allow a consortium led by Morgan Stanley to run more than 36,000 metered parking spaces for 75 years. The city continues to set the rules and rates for the meters and collect the parking fines, but the investors keep the revenues, which this year will more than triple the $20 million the city was collecting, according to credit rating firms. In other words, if you live in Chicago, Morgan Stanley is charging you for parking on the streets that your fathers built. Based on the new rates, the Inspector General claimed the city was shortchanged by about $1 billion. The investors will make their money back in 20 years, and we are stuck for 50 more years making $0. Around the country, at least a dozen public parking systems are up for bid, including in San Francisco and Las Vegas. In Pittsburgh, the mayor is proposing to lease out the parking system for an upfront sum of about $300 million over 50 years and funnel the money back into the pension system. But the city will ultimately lose $3.5 billion over the life of the lease. And guess which group will ultimately have to make up that deficit? You got it. You, the taxpayer. Remember, the corporation is not interested in good fiscal policy. Its sole purpose is to make its shareholders a profit. Water supply is also being sold to private interests. In Milwaukee, a consumer advocate called a plan to sell the water system, mortgaging Milwaukee's future. The report by Washington-based Food and Water Watch says private water service in general costs 59% more as new owners seek to recoup their investment. Water users cannot vote private managers or state-appointed regulators out of office. When you as the public cannot vote your officials out of office, you as the public do not have a constitutional or representative government. Airports are also being privatized under a limited federal program. Now, you may have noticed that one of the saleable items in the above list was housing. Strange as that sounds, the truth is even stranger. Here's the deal. You are not the owner of your land or your home. You are actually listed as a tenant on your title and deed, regardless of whether your home is paid in full or not. You may stay in your home under one condition, that you pay your property taxes. Property tax can simply be defined as extortion or racketeering. It is rent paid to the government, municipality, county, and state for which your house resides as protection money, so that your house is not confiscated. If you believe this to be untrue, that you are indeed the master of your own home, then I would invite you to stop paying your rent in the form of property tax to the government. The corporate police will be summoned to remove you from your home for your lack of payment of property tax, and your land and home will be reabsorbed into the municipality and probably sold at auction to the next fool who thinks that they have the freedom and right of ownership. Eminent domain is virtually undefendable, as you were never the property owner in the first place. This is the corporatization of liberty. So just what is corporatism? The word corporation is derived from the Latin word corpus, which translates into English as body. Formal corporatist models are based upon the contract of corporate groups such as agriculture, business, ethnic, labor, military, patronage, scientific, or religious affiliations into a collective body. There's that word again, collective. For instance, all individual Methodist churches pay the main corporate church, which is indeed a for-profit corporation, with each of their individual 501c3 houses of worship across the country and the world acting as their non-profit branches. This is why all denominations hold general conferences. They are nothing but giant corporate budget meetings. In this way, churches can be regulated by the state. Yes, churches are corporations, and yet, almost humorously, we demand all the while, not comprehending that the Constitution we hold so dear provides for not only religious freedom, free of corporate tyranny and control, but for the freedom to peacefully assemble without government interference and without taxation of any kind. Non-profit status for churches is a redundancy that is both repugnant and absolutely unnecessary. This is the corporatization of God. And yes, the military, as a government-owned entity, as a constitutionally forbidden standing army, is a corporately held private world police force, currently guarding poppy seeds in Afghanistan, oil fields in Iraq, and having bases of operation in just about every country in the world. This is the state of the corporate military today, to protect and serve the continuity of the government, or the corporation. This is the corporatization of war. This age-old recipe of corporatism and fascism has been utilized by most ideologies across the political spectrum, including absolutism, capitalism, conservatism, fascism, liberalism, progressivism, reactionism, social democracy, socialism, and syndicalism. Interestingly, the idea of a central bank is actually one of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. And indeed, all of these Marxist ideals of how to turn a government into a communist state have been made into law in the United States federal government through executive orders, presidential directives, acts of Congress, and other legislation. Equally as intriguing, the term democracy is actually a communist term, completely opposite of the constitutional idealism of a republic. The difference? Simply stated, democracy is a majority rule. So, if 51% of the people get what they want, then 49% of the people get something they don't want. Democracy is two wolves and a sheep sitting down to discuss dinner plans. Whereas a republic form of government, which is guaranteed by the Constitution, is well-armed sheep. What did the Founding Fathers think of democracy? The word democracy does not ever appear in the Declaration of Independence nor in the Constitution. It also never appears in any of the 50 state constitutions. In short, we are not supposed to be a democracy. The Founding Fathers actually did everything they could to keep our new country out of a democracy, knowing that a democracy is just a patriotic word for an oligarchy. Here's what some of the Founding Fathers had to say about a democracy. Quote, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Unquote. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, from the Federalist Papers, essay number 10. Quote, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in the despotism or the extremes of democracy." Unquote. Alexander Hamilton. Quote, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." Unquote. Samuel Adams. Rome was a democracy as it fell in 180 AD, as all historically significant democratic empires have. Now, politicians and corporations will denounce this, ridiculously proclaiming that we have a democratic republic. But in truth, the two concepts are too opposite from each other to be used to describe each other. This would be like describing a color as blackish white. The Bill of Rights are God-given. They are not privileges to be suffocated and chiseled away by legalities and statutes forced upon the public by corporate government weasels in fancy suits, ties, and black robes. Government-owned corporations were never intended to be the police, the treasury, the municipalities or cities, the army, or the appointed legislators. But this is what we have become, a democracy. A better title would be an oligarchic corporocracy, or fascism. Corporations owned through a collective investment by the government, whom advertise popular candidates like Obama, knowing that once he is elected he will appoint former, current, and future corporation lobbyists and attorneys, CEOs, and board members into positions favorable to private corporate government no-bid contracts, thus ensuring future revenue generation for the government-owned corporations while generating wealth and kickbacks for the corporate representatives that are appointed by the elected official, namely the President of the United States Corporation, U.S. Inc. Remember, by electing one person as president, you are giving permission to that person to appoint hundreds and hundreds of unelected officials, who then also appoint unelected officials under themselves, and thousands of appointed corporate power brokers with fancy titles like Secretary of State, Chief of Staff, and Secretary of Defense. The point here is this: you do not have a representative government. End of story. Thus, when we hear our politicians and media hounds constantly harping about bringing democracy to the rest of the world, what this really means is that the United States Incorporated wants to expand its business base internationally. Be it oil in Iraq, poppy seeds in Afghanistan, water and mineral rights in South America, or simply the power to use our corporate and United Nations-controlled military to destroy a country's infrastructure so that companies like Halliburton can receive billions in taxpayer money
to rebuild the newly controlled asset Of course, Halliburton has subsidiary companies like Kellogg, Brown and Root, and so forth. And then there are others like Bechtel that specialize in the U.S. imperialistic takeovers of countries after the bombing ends. Now, who supplies the bombs for the private military? Could that be companies like General Dynamics and flown in by Northrop Grumman and McDonnell Douglas? How about Boeing? How about General Electric? How about Martin Marietta? How about Lockheed Martin? How about Raytheon? How about DuPont and 3M? It gives business to company after company. And who owns stock in that company? That's right. Just like we've had it explained to us here, it's the federal government and the state governments and the municipalities, all as individual for-profit corporations with stock holdings in these companies that are profiting vastly from the wars. Something is very, very sick about this. So have we noticed things that are outrageously suspicious here? Have we noticed satanic symbolism in religious areas? Have we noticed politicians and other power brokers using satanic hand signs and Masonic greetings? Have we noticed people like Dick Cheney, who helped engineer that war, he owns millions of dollars of stock in Halliburton? Here we've got religious leaders and political leaders all giving Masonic greetings. There's something going on here. I think we know that something big is happening here. And these guys are just all cooperating with each other. Now, Cheney was CEO of Halliburton, and there we've got the Brotherhood of Death, 322, Skull and Bones. These guys, they're bold, they're showing their signs, they're working together. Here we got President Hinckley. He's an expert in communication, in the art of persuasion, and he's going to show us here whose side he's really on, who he's working for. Do you think he's working for the Lord God? Or do you think he's working for Halliburton, Bechtel, and Bush? Let's see.
Those of us who are American citizens stand solidly with the President of our nation. The terrible forces of evil must be confronted and held accountable for their actions. Of such groups, the Book of Mormon speaks of the Gadianton robbers, a vicious, oath-bound, and secret organization bent on evil and destruction. No one knows how long it will last. No one knows precisely where it will be fought. No one knows what it may entail before it is over. We've launched an undertaking, the size and nature of which we cannot see at this time. Occasions of this kind
Now more than ever, as the families in the Middle East and elsewhere brace against the bombs of the American war machine, God needs to be communicating with his prophets to cry out against these modern Gadiantons and proclaim peace to the world, freedom from this wickedness. But instead, ministers of all faiths promote war. They stand as Amalekites upon the towers. In the name of patriotism, liberty, and freedom, they support war efforts and call the people to obey their wicked leaders, as the Amalekites did to the Lamanites who attacked the innocent Nephites in the Book of Mormon. And even now, as the bombs are falling in the Middle East, we ask, where is the prophet of the Lord? Gordon B. Hinckley, art thou a prophet?
I do not know what the future holds. In the course of history, tyrants have arisen from time to time who have oppressed their own people and threatened the world. Such is judged to be the case presently, and consequently, great and terrifying forces with sophisticated and fearsome armaments have been engaged in battle. Many of our own church members have been involved in this conflict. We have seen on television and in the press tearful children clinging to their fathers in uniform going to the battlefront. In a touching letter I received just this week, a mother wrote of her Marine son who's serving for the second time in a Middle Eastern war. She says that at the time of his first deployment, he came home on leave and asked me to go for a walk. He had his arm around me and he told me about going to war. He said, "Mom, I have to go so you and the family can be free to worship as you please. And if it costs me my life, then giving my life is worth it." He is now there again and has written to his family recently saying, "I am proud to be here serving my nation and our way of life. I feel a lot safer knowing our Heavenly Father is with me."
This is a war of aggression and violates the commandments in the Scriptures.
As citizens, we are all under the direction of our respective national leaders. They have access to greater political and military intelligence than do the people generally. Those in the armed services are under obligation to their respective governments to execute the will of the sovereign. When they joined the military service, they entered into a contract by which they are presently bound and to which they have dutifully responded. One of our articles of faith, which represents an expression of our doctrine, states, "We believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law." But modern revelation states that we are to renounce war and proclaim peace. In a democracy, we can renounce war and proclaim peace. However, we all must also be mindful of another overriding responsibility, which, I may add, governs my personal feelings and dictates my personal loyalties in the present situation. When war raged between the Nephites and the Lamanites, the record states that the Nephites were inspired by a better cause, for they were not fighting for power, but they were fighting for their homes and their liberties, their wives and their children, and their all, yea, for their rights of worship and their church. And they were doing that which they felt was duty, which they owed to their God. The Lord counseled them, "Defend your families, even unto bloodshed." And Moroni rent his coat, and he took a piece thereof, and wrote upon it, "In memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children." And he called it the title of liberty. It is clear from these and other writings that there are times and circumstances when nations are justified, in fact, have an obligation to fight for family, for liberty, and against tyranny, threat, and oppression. Peace. We are followers of our Redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the Prince of Peace. But even he said, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world.
And the rule of law.
Scowcroft has been a key and trusted advisor to the last five. And as National Security Advisor to President Bush, is a steady and vital associate in ongoing relationships between the White House and leaders of all other nations across the world. President Hinckley, President Lee, we have perhaps an unparalleled opportunity to help to create a new world order, one more conducive to the values Americans have held dear. A new world order will appear. The issue is not whether there will be a new world order, and suggest what the new world order can and should become.
At that BYU graduation address, we had featured speaker Brent Scowcroft, Elder Scowcroft, General Scowcroft, and one of the architects of the NSA and most connected men on earth as far as involvement with organizations promoting the New World Order. Let's take just a quick look at Brother Scowcroft here. This is in the Superclass Index for NGO involvement. At the top of the list for in the world, we've got Henry Kissinger. Down the list, we see George Shultz, David Rockefeller, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Bush family, Paul Volcker, former head of the Fed, and Brent Scowcroft coming in at, I think that's number 10 there, just ahead of George Soros. Okay, and his involvement, and you see some of these other guys on here. Going to the next list here, this is in America. Henry Kissinger topping the list once again. There we see the Rothschild and Bush families, Maurice Greenberg, Paul Volcker, and Brent Scowcroft. Again, right next to George Soros. Rumsfeld, Peter G. Peterson, if you know who he is. Okay, Dick Cheney. Alright, looking further here. Look, here's some honors he's got. He's got the Presidential Honor Medal of Freedom, and he's also in the KBE. He's knighted by the Queen in the British Empire, Order of the Cross, also, and then another Grand Cross of the Order of Merit for the German Republic, and various other international things. And now here he says, for joining the Bush administration, Scowcroft was vice chairman of Kissinger Associates, long time standing, so he's always been, partners with Kissinger, plus he was in the National Advisory Board. Kissinger's the head satanic guy in almost everything in these groups. Scowcroft's president of Scowcroft's Group, international business consulting firm. He's in the Aspen Strategy Group, Trilateral Commission. This is on Wikipedia, by the way. Council on Foreign Relations, Center for Strategic International Studies, the Atlantic Council. These are all NWO things. The Bohemian Grove. He's part of the Bohemian Club, the most perverted club on earth, probably. People like Kissinger in there. There it is. Scowcroft next to Kissinger. All these horrendous people. David Rockefeller. It's a huge list, but these are guys that are actually members of that particular super perverted club. So, CFR, Trilaterals, Bohemian Club, NSA, Chief, everything. And he's speaking to the BYU students. Nice. I believe they've had Brzezinski and Cheney, all, New World Order guys, CFR, Bohemian Club guys, most of them, if not all, filthy individuals. And Elder Scowcroft invited to speak at BYU there. Of course, BYU is a recruiting ground for the CIA and the NSA and the FBI. Wonder why?
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders. Global governance.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions.
A truly global society. Its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity, and it's exactly one government.
Good evening, everybody. President Obama and British Prime Minister Gordon today calling for a new world order to tackle our global economic crisis.
And the President outlined his vision of a new world order in which the U.S. would participate fully.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
So I see a world order in the future with a multipolar world order.
I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation.
India will be a central actor in the new world order.
And this present window of opportunity during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built will not be here for too long.
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, when soldiers died in wave upon wave for a union based on liberty, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order, and instead it looks like we got a lot of disorder.
Additionally, we've seen from the great work done by the Global Tyranny Channel guy and whoever else may be with him helping him, the fantastic job he did on Corporation Nation. We've taken excerpts out of that, and you might want to go to that channel and see the whole presentation. It's a little over 3 hours. They did a great job. They showed the corporate ties here, and that pretty much ties it all together with everything we've seen between the hand signs, the satanic stuff in the architecture, the handshakes between these guys, and boldly proclaiming the New World Order, as you're about to see a little bit more of, and then we'll watch Global Tyranny, Corporation Nation tie up some loose ends here with some additional information.
And now we get to perhaps the most important part of this whole presentation. For if you comprehend the following, you will finally understand what corporate governments and government-owned corporations really are. Here on Chart E, CalSTRS lists its largest equity holdings as of June 30th, 2000. And it states that just in General Electric stock alone, it holds 28,948,341 shares of General Electric stock, with a market value of $1,534,262,073. That, my friends, is a major market share of General Electric stock. And once again, we must remember that this is just one of over 185,000 different governments in the United States. It also lists Intel Corp with 9.9 million shares, Cisco Systems at 20.5 million shares, Microsoft Corporation at 15.7 million shares, Pfizer Pharmaceuticals Incorporated at 18.6 million shares, ExxonMobil Corporation at 10 million shares, Walmart stores at 12.8 million shares, Oracle Corporation at 8.6 million shares, Nortel Networks Corporation at 9.2 million shares, and Vodafone AirTouch at 147.8 million shares. And these are just the largest of the stock holdings within CalSTRS. Walter Burian of CalFor1.com has estimated that government ownership of just Microsoft Corporation stock is at approximately 83%, with the 5 boroughs of New York City proper owning collectively about 5% of that company. This means that everything that you do on your computer and everything that is included in your end-user agreement belongs to the government. And the government is the one regulating the internet. It's also the one regulating advertising, usury, and fraud laws. The conflicts of interest here are astounding. Because remember, the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency are private government offices with access to everything that you do on the internet and through Microsoft. And Apple computers are also government owned. Now, understanding that, we go to page 46, where CalSTRS actually devoted a paragraph to corporate governance. Now, if you still don't comprehend what a proxy vote means, this is an admission of guilt. It states, during the 1999-2000 fiscal year, CalSTRS voted on a variety of proxy issues including financial, corporate governance, and social issues. There were 7,192 votes cast on proxy issues of corporations whose shares were owned in the investment portfolio. These proxy issues were presented on 2,789 companies. The overall number of proxy issues increased from 6,588 last year, but the number of mergers and acquisitions reviewed remained constant at a little more than 10%. Merger activity, both within United States borders and across the borders, continued its steady course, especially in those transactions where stock is the compensation received by the acquired company's holders. This reflects the continued appreciation in the stock market both at home and abroad. So this government corporation, one of over 185,000 within the United States, just told us that it voted on a variety of proxy issues including financial, corporate governance, and social issues, with 7,192 votes cast on proxy issues of corporations whose shares were owned in their investment portfolio. In other words, CalSTRS is acting as a major shareholder, voting as partial owners of these corporations on issues that dictate the future success of those corporations. This is corporate governance, in the words of the United States government. This is perhaps the most important, revealing paragraph you will ever read in your lifetime. This is fascism. Then, on page 47, CalSTRS states that by proxy, the major issues voted on are summarized below. And once again, this is criminal activity. And by this point, surely you realize the Constitution is out the window. Number 1, election of directors. CalSTRS generally votes in favor of directors unless the proxy statement shows circumstances contrary to policy. The selection of auditors and accountants. CalSTRS generally votes in favor on the independent auditors and accountants recommended can only serve to benefit CalSTRS. The government is the corporations. The corporations are the government. There is no fine line. That line has been erased. And just like our Constitution, money is out there in this collective government. Let's just take a look at a few more governments and municipalities from around the country. Let's start with my hometown and the capital of California, Sacramento. $1.3 billion. We have total net assets at $2,518 million for the city of Sacramento. And that's important because this is only the city government or municipality of Sacramento and its summary of net assets. But what about the county of Sacramento? Again, the county of Sacramento is a totally different government. And within its comprehensive annual financial report for the year 2009, again under the Financial Highlights section, and under its statement of net assets for the year ended June 30th, 2009, expressed in thousands of dollars, we see the total for liabilities and net assets equals in the positive, meaning its assets outweigh its liabilities, by $6,712,350,000. So Sacramento County ain't doing so bad. Sacramento County is, of course, invested in the California Public Employees Retirement System, or CalPERS. And the more government employees, the better for the fund, since each employee enrolled in this pension fund for state workers requires by law that their state employers contribute to the fund as well. Of course, that is taxpayer money that is being contributed on behalf of these state employees, since taxpayer money funds these government offices. Thus, the intent and motive for the creation of government jobs and the hiring and firing of state employees is based more on profit for the state and local pension funds, way more than it is for just government-related business need. So let's take a look at the CalPERS CAFR. As we examine this financial report, we again get a look into the vast amounts of wealth that California holds in its pension funds. Dwarfing the California State Teachers Retirement Pension Fund, the CalPERS Summary of Investments for its Public Employee Retirement Fund shows a total investment value of $197,102,773,341. It also shows real estate investments at almost $20 billion. However, in this almost $200 billion fund, it's fairly obvious that CalPERS is invested in Fortune 500 and foreign corporations. And here again we have the largest stock holdings for CalPERS, and it appears to be the usual suspects, with stock investments in ExxonMobil Corporation at 14.2 million shares, Microsoft Corporation at 23.1 million shares, Johnson & Johnson at 7.6 million shares, AT&T at 17 million shares, Procter & Gamble Company at 8 million shares, International Business Machines at 3.9 million shares, Chevron Corporation at 6.1 million shares, J.P. Morgan Chase Company at 11.1 million shares, Apple Computers, once again at 2.5 million shares, and Walmart rounds out the top 10 at 7.2 million shares. It also lists its largest bond holdings, listed in thousands and showing billions and billions of dollars worth of bond holdings. And it seems like everybody's invested in the Tennessee Valley Authority. And interestingly, and what seems to me a bit of a conflict of interest, is that it's having J.P. Morgan Securities as one of its larger brokers. I find it hard to believe that there's not some conflict of interest in having major stock holdings in the company that is your broker. And we see that the total commission and broker fees for the pension fund is $84,418,000. And at the end of it all, we see that net assets held in trust for pension and other post-employment benefits equals $178,899,883,000. Plus a little over $1 billion in other California funds. And now you understand where a lot of this government money is being hidden, within the pension and other funds. Now, this documentary wouldn't be complete if I didn't include the Salt Lake City Corporation, would it? According to Salt Lake City Corporation's comprehensive annual financial report, year ending June 30th, 2009, Under its financial highlights section, it states that the assets of Salt Lake City, the city, exceeded its liabilities at the end of the current fiscal year by $2,116,861,947. Net assets for year 2009 increased by $65.9 million. It also states that the city's governmental funds reported combined ending fund balance of $119.2 million, an increase of $28.7 million compared to the prior year's ending amount. Fines and forfeitures, assessments, interest, intergovernmental, parking meters, charges for services, contributions, sales use and excise taxes, franchise taxes. These serve to benefit no one, and the total revenues collected from the people of the municipality or corporation of Salt Lake City equate to $191 million just in fines and fees. Again, we see corruption at its finest. And we see that the fund balance, which represents all of these fees and other usurious activities, is in the black at $24,258,000. Now again, we just made the mistake of taking this statement of net assets as the total government assets, without taking into consideration the enterprise operations, operating investment funds, and pension funds listed towards the end of the report. Now, in the Salt Lake CAFR, it states that the city participates in 3 cost-sharing multiple employer public retirement systems, PERS, PERS, and 1 multiple employer agent PERS. And it references the public safety retirement system, and it goes into the actuarial rate and asset values. So let's take a look at Utah Retirement Systems, a component unit of the state of Utah. It states that the fair value of assets as of January 1, 2009 was $15,886,000 and grew by almost $2 billion to a fair market value of $17,717,000 as of December 31, 2009. Also, it states the actuarial value of these assets, which are available for benefits, is at $20,818,000. Once again, we get into our corporate governance section, and the state pension fund has its list of largest assets held. ExxonMobil, Apple, JP Morgan Chase, Microsoft, Google, Hewlett-Packard, Cisco Systems, Pfizer, Wells Fargo, and AT&T. Once again, this represents ownership in all of these companies, and these are just the top 10. And once again, we see the conflict of interest by having JP Morgan Chase as a broker, and we see that the total of fees and commissions paid for this particular fund was $4,367,000. Now, in its other fund, again, we have a different list of largest assets held, and we see that it includes the same stocks, with Apple Computers, Google, Microsoft Corporation, Hewlett-Packard, Cisco Systems, Qualcomm, JP Morgan Chase, ExxonMobil, Visa, and Schlumberger Limited. And lots of money invested in debt securities. And so once again, we can see where the state of Utah, the city of Salt Lake, and the county of Salt Lake are stashing and investing their money. Now, there is one final curtain that needs to be unveiled here. The Federal Reserve has been a hot topic of conversation among those in the truth and freedom movements. And leading the pack with his winning smile and stoic persona is the lovable congressman by the name of Ron Paul. Mr. Paul is the leading advocate of not only ending the central bank in the form of the Federal Reserve, but also of auditing this horrendous bank as well. But audit is an interesting choice of words to use for his cause, since Ron Paul is fully aware that the Federal Reserve is obligated under federal law to submit a comprehensive annual financial report to the federal government. While I respect and admire Congressman Paul, sadly, as a congressman, he is equally complicit in the cover-up of these financial audits in the form of CAFRs. The Comprehensive Annual Financial Report is the audit of the Federal Reserve, and he knows this.
So they mention privately held corporations, and it sounded like Florida was invested in privately held corporations, which they did not show on their balance sheet. What privately held corporations might those be? Churches? We learned that churches are corporations, 501c3 corporations. Who holds the stock in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? You know, when you think about the power that the stockholders hold, the majority stockholders, over the board of directors, and the policy that companies need to follow to please the stockholders, we see certain what we would call politically correct venues or themes in many commercials from various companies on television, touting certain themes that are in the politically correct agenda. We've also seen the LDS Church do that. Let's think about some of the changes in the church with tone. Well, of course, 1 Nephi chapter 13 and 14 discuss the church of the devil, and all the other churches being part of the church of the devil. The Catholic Church is aptly described, as well as Brigham Young and Orson Pratt verifying that, and I believe probably Bruce McConkie. But now, in recent years, we've had apostles from the church go to the Vatican to participate in conferences of religious leaders hosted by the church, the great and abominable church of the devil, the whore of Babylon, as it has been described by numerous of the prophets and apostles. What about the change with race and priesthood? We've heard various reasons why that might have happened. Brigham Young said seed of Cain can't have the priesthood till after the seed of Abel does. If that was a revelation from the Lord, then why did the Lord change his mind about preempting the millennium on that one? What about the statements and the disavowing that's gone on with regard to anything to do with dark skin, when 2 Nephi chapter 5 and Alma chapter 3 are explicit that that is a sign of divine disfavor, that the Lord cursed the Lamanites as such and put a mark on them, insinuating the same thing would have happened in Moses chapter 7 with the Canaanites and the seed of Cain. The church has changed a lot, and what it's talking about now is doctrine, disavowing things that were scriptural from Joseph Smith and reiterated or expounded upon by Brigham Young and some of his associates, such as Orson Pratt, Heber Kimball, and Jedediah Grant. So, what's this due to? Is God just changing all of a sudden? I thought God was unchangeable. But many things have changed. Whether you think it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, the fact is it shows God is changing. And with all this corporate governance business, you have to ask yourself, who does own the major stock in the preferred shares of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Corporation of the First Presidency, and various other portions of the vast corporate empire? That's owned. That's owned. Now, the church supposedly has gotten into some financial trouble. Not lately. But what about when they gambled everything, mortgaged everything, in order to invest in, was it the sugar beet industry and so forth, and then the market kind of crashed? They get in trouble there? And did they wind up in trouble with, was it Union Bank of New York, or Rockefeller Bank? And were they bailed out maybe by someone in the Rothschild clan? I've read that. Now, how can I verify it? I don't know, but what I can see is that the church has gotten awfully politically correct over the not too many years lately. People talk about it was political pressure for the race and priesthood thing, but it just happened about 2 months right before the Sao Paulo, Brazil temple opened. And I'm sure that temple is a lot more profitable with people of mixed blood being able to officiate and be patrons. There are those that said it would not have been able to operate at all. You had to show photographs 4 generations back to make sure you weren't a white Negro when joining the church in Brazil, if you read up on that. So you're making sure that that one drop of blood that was tainted with the blood of Cain wasn't being given the priesthood back before June of 1978. Plenty of speculation on why those things happen, but somebody owns the stock. Some holding company owns the stock. And he mentioned the merger and acquisition policies and so forth. If you take a look at the steady course of mergers, you notice so many companies are owned now by huge conglomerates. And many you just don't even notice the holding companies behind them. Whether it's the food market, supermarkets, whether it's in banking, whether it's in energy companies, on telecommunications. Things have gone from many companies and smaller companies to huge conglomerates. He said the media was owned by about 6 companies in the United States. I mean, look at these. If you do a little investigating, you'll find out that the wealth and power is held by a very, very few. So this was a lot about the physical aspects, the financial aspects, practical and provable aspects of something that's not in harmony with what they were teaching in church. Not last I checked. It's pretty clear there's something going on behind the scenes, that there are secret alliances. People go, look at Schwarzenegger. I mean, he's Mr. Bodybuilder, and then he's Mr. Hollywood, and then he's governor of the state of California. 10% of the United States is California. What about Reagan? There he is. He's a Mason. He's was he head of the Actors Guild? Goes from Hollywood to governor to president of the United States. These people move from their hierarchy in one area at the top, and then they're at the top of another area. How does that happen? Well, things aren't what they appear on the surface, are they? And what video on any conspiracy issue is ever complete without watching Building 7 fall demolition style without ever being hit by a plane?
Here's Building 7 coming down. That's demolition. That's a no-brainer. The Twin Towers are demolition. It's not rocket science. It's aircraft fuel science. But not for Building 7. It never even got hit. They went straight down with no resistance. Understanding the purpose of the temple in LDS religion requires letting go of certain preconceived ideas about religion.
there's reason to believe that religions, or the portion of them that are doled out for membership to the people at large in society, are all fraudulent. Those who are at the top tend to be occultists, who have their own religion, which is not the religion they profess outwardly. These religions serve multiple purposes. They're profitable businesses, and they're elements of control for those who are in control of society. And so they must teach those things which those in control of government covertly wish to be taught. You'll note that whenever the United States Incorporated wants to go to war, they get the Christian ministers to inspire patriotism in the people and support the war effort. Just as Joseph Smith taught in the Book of Mormon with the Amalekites on the towers, convincing the Lamanites to go to war against the Nephites. The temple binds Mormons to the religion, to loyalty, in following the brethren and paying tithing. The business must have income to flourish. Using the motivation of the people, which is to live with their families in happiness forever, which necessitates participating in temple ordinances, both for the living and for the deceased, in order to give all of your family tree members the opportunity to accept Jesus Christ as their Savior in this life or in the alleged life hereafter. Where we are told deceased priesthood holders continue to labor in preaching the gospel of salvation and eternal family relationships through the same actions of repentance and accepting the Father's plan of eternal progression, by following the commandments attributed to Jesus Christ, in order to qualify through doing all we can to serve and obey Him, that He may grant us forgiveness, and whatsoever we lack, to become saved by His grace, and become heirs of eternal life, joint heirs with the Christ. So, you do all you can to help bring salvation to all your family, past, present, and future, as well as the rest of mankind. You obey Jesus by obedience to the brethren, who claim to be His authorized representatives through the holy priesthood. This system gives total divine authority to command absolute obedience by the superiors in the priesthood. Bound by oaths taken in the temple, and tied to the eligibility for the promised blessings previously mentioned, which are automatically nullified if you fail to endure to the end. In other words, the day you stop paying and otherwise obeying anything you are counseled or called upon to do, whether it's serving as a full-time missionary or clean up the church properties, or teach Sunday school, or serve as a membership or financial clerk, or any other free labor to build or maintain the massive corporate empire which you are indoctrinated to believe is the current structure of the kingdom of God on earth. You are responsible for helping provide saving ordinances for your ancestors, which deceased ancestors provide an endless excuse for a need to return to the temple and remain fully worthy through obedience, including tithing. Temple participation reinforces indoctrination in mind programming, including technologically enhanced methods, creating members who believe they firmly chose obedience all on their own, when in fact they've been mind-controlled to obey, serve, and be fleeced by the sheep shearers that head the flock home, the leaders of the religion. The leaders of business and government and banking and media and education are all connected to the networks of secret societies, or through such networks, shall I say. Tithing is like interest. Like all payments to churches, banks, and governments, they are tribute paid by the conquered enslaved masses to the ruling class, the actual owners and officers of privately held, profitable corporations of whose asset base you are a very real part. Like Gordon B. Hinckley said, those who don't understand interest pay it. Those who do understand it collect it. This is also true of tithing and all government extortion practices. You will note that in exchange for the cooperation that the leaders offer to the government, they receive tax-exempt status, and donations are given tax credit benefits for those contributing to the organizations, as long as they support the agenda of those in power, which are not necessarily those who appear to be elected representatives of people in what appear to be democratic republics. When you learn that everything is actually commerce, including governments, whether city, county, state, or federal, or employee, funds for like CalPERS and CalSTRS and so forth.
A lot of things just
you learn
start
this,
to fall
and the
into
churches
place
are
and
also
make
all
sense.
businesses. They're all corporations with vast investments in each other's businesses. The version on secret combinations in LDS scripture, or secret societies, oath-bound secret societies. So it starts in Book of Moses, chapter 5, in the Pearl of Great Price. It says, "And Satan said unto Cain, Swear unto me by thy throat, if thou tell it, thou shalt die. And swear thy brethren by their heads, and by the living God, that if they tell it, they shall surely die." So they started this secret society there, and Satan and Cain had said that Satan swore that unto Cain that he'd do as according to his commands. All these things were done in secret. And so Cain said, "Truly I am Master Mahan's the master of this great secret." Wherefore Cain was called Master Mahan, and he gloried in his wickedness. According to David Icke, that Mahan should be translated Mason, something to do with Hebrew. Don't know if he's got something there or not. Okay, so Cain does his thing and murders Abel and so forth. And then Cain involves other people in his secret society. Well, he just did, but it says, going on, it says, he and his wife and many of their brethren went and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And then Cain knew his wife and had children, and they had a son named Enoch. They built a city and named it after Enoch. And then Enoch, had Mahaziel and then Lamech, and as you can notice, they resemble the names of the good guy patriarchs from the line of Seth. But this is a bad Enoch and a bad so on and so forth. And Lamech, anyway, Ada and Zillah were his wives, and then they had a son named Tubal-Cain. That's a big name in Freemasonry also. This seems to be like Masonic lore before Joseph Smith was actually a Freemason. He seems to be writing things that are about these things. So anyway, Lamech entered into a covenant with Satan, and he became the Master Mahan guy here. It says, after the manner wherein... For Lamech, having entered into a covenant with Satan after the manner of Cain, wherein he became Master Mahan, master of that great secret, administered unto Cain by Satan. And okay, so one of his descendants revealed their secret combination to the ladies, and so Lamech killed him for the sake of the oath of their secret oaths from their secret society. And their works were in the dark, and they were wicked. Okay, so now we go to Ether, chapter 8 in the Book of Mormon. Loses the kingdom back to his dad because his brothers managed to be successful in retaining the kingdom or getting it for their dad. He was sad, so his daughter, who was expert in some wicked things and very good looking, told her dad, "Hey, look, I'll dance in front of Achish, and he'll want me to be his wife, and you just ask him for the head of your father," kind of like the John the Baptist story. So Achish gets his relatives involved in a secret society called a secret combination here. So it says, "And it came to pass that they formed a secret combination, even as they of old, which combination is most abominable and wicked above all in the sight of God. For the Lord God worketh not in secret combinations, doesn't want you to shed blood, etc. But I, Moroni, I do not write the manner of their oaths and combinations, as they had among the Lamanites and among all people, and they've caused the destruction of the Jaredites and the people of Nephi." And it says, "Whatsoever nation shall uphold such secret combinations, so they get power over the face of the land, shall be destroyed." So he goes on to warn the Gentiles here. Okay, and he says, "Wherefore, O ye Gentiles," Ether 8, starting in verse 23 now, "It's wisdom in God that these things should be shown unto you, that thereby you may repent of your sins and suffer not that these murderous combinations should get above you, which are built up to get power and gain. And the work of destruction come upon you, even the work of the sword of the eternal God." Earlier it said there, for power, gain, glory, all those kind of things, that people could get whatever they wanted and, have power and get away with all kinds of wickedness and murder and whoredom. So, the warning unto the Gentiles here from the Lord. Wherefore the Lord commandeth you, when you shall see these things come among you, that ye shall awake to the sense of your awful situation, because of this secret combination which shall be among you. It says to the Gentiles here. We're talking, it seems to be directed to the people of the United States, particularly, which shall be among you, or will be unto it because of the blood of the innocent people that it kills. Okay. For it cometh to pass that whoso buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries, and it bringeth to pass the destruction of all people, for it is built up by the devil. Okay, so that's our that's kind of the basis there, the beginnings of it. Now the daughter of Jared, this is the bad Jared, not the good Jared, this is a little later on, said that, hey, Dad, didn't they have writings, and the things we brought with us across the deep about these secret combinations? I always thought, why would, these people that are righteous, these prophets, be bringing the oaths of satanic secret societies across the deep one? But anyway, that's what the reference is there a little earlier. It's all either chapter 8 there. And then, of course, later we have some references to their people being destroyed, and the government being destroyed and so forth. It says, therefore they did combine against the people of the Lord and enter into a covenant to destroy them and to deliver those who were guilty of murder from the grasp of justice, which was about to be administered according to the law. And they did set at defiance the law and the rights of their country, and they did covenant with one with another to destroy the governor and to establish a king over the land, that the land should no more be at liberty, but should be subject unto kings. How about that? So this secret combination just decided to destroy. This was the people that went to Jacob Boogath, I think. So they wanted to destroy the representative government the Nephites had, where they voted in their chief judges and established kings. Oddly, in 1776, May 1st, on Beltane, a satanic holiday, Adam Weishaupt officially inaugurated the Illuminati, and they wanted to do the opposite. They wanted to destroy the monarchies, and establish a different form of government, probably representative government that they could more easily control. How about that? Kind of weird, huh? So
with all that warning in the Book of Moses and the Book of Mormon, in particular to secret societies that sound so reminiscent of Illuminated Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, etc., that the Danites and the Council of 50 get set up in the church. Pretty weird, huh? Oath-bound secret societies, which it says the Lord worketh not in secret societies or secret combinations. So those are some pretty puzzling things. And then when we see the activities of the brethren and the handshakes they give to the president and vice president, and some of the other folks in religion and politics doing the same thing, it kind of tells us something, doesn't it?